As someone who spent a lot of time as a kid dressed up as a pirate, I played surprisingly few pirate games. Simply because, while there seemed to be a new space adventure or fantasy game every other week, there were not a lot of games that let you play as a pirate, at least not the seafaring kind. But there was one game that I did spend a lot of time playing, and that was Pirates Gold. Now, at the time, I thought this was a standalone game, and I didn't know of any other versions. And in my defense, at the time as a young kid, I had very little access to gaming news. So whatever I heard from friends was often my only source of news. What I found out slightly later was that Pirates Gold is actually based on the 1987 PC game simply titled Pirates, which for all intents and purposes is the same game as Gold, just dramatically simplified to be a better match for hardware of the time. However, once I had access to the internet many years later, I learned that the original PC version itself was based on a cassette Commodore 64 version and had been ported many times, including to the PC. Now, while I haven't personally played the Commodore 64 version, I have seen footage of it over on C64 Wiki, which I'll link in the description. And honestly, for a Commodore 64 game, it is impressive to say the least, and really goes to show the credentials of developer Sid Meier. As far as the ports go, the original Pirates was made available for Amstrad, Apple II, Mac, PC-88, Atari ST, Amiga, and even the NES. Honestly, I think you'd struggle to find another title released during this time that was ported to so many different platforms, and the best bit was that by all accounts, they were all very well received. It's perhaps this momentum from these positive reviews that led to the creation of Pirates Gold in 1993, released for DOS, Windows, Macintosh, and Genesis, again all with fairly favourable reviews. But it didn't stop there. 11 years later, in 2004, we saw another reboot of Pirates, simply known as Pirates, but often hyphenated as the 2004 version. Now, the version we're going to be looking at today is Pirates Gold for DOS, with no modifications to the original code, outside, of course, of the modifications that the Gold version brought to the original game. Now, unsurprisingly, the game sees you playing as a pirate, either through a specific time period as a career or a specific expedition. The expeditions are a good way to have a quick game, but where the game really shines is in the career mode, in which you select from one of 6 time periods, each with their own specific twists on the world. For example, in the 1500s, it's a lot easier to be a true pirate and raid other ships and ports, whereas in the 1600s, many of the nations have deployed packs of warships to hunt down pirates. Once you've decided on the time period, it's time to select your nationality, with once again the choice being quite relevant depending on the time period. For example, if it's a time period that the Spanish were rich and well armed, playing as the Spanish will be a lot easier. However, if it's a time where the Spanish were rich, yet not well armed, it will be a lot more challenging. There's also a prompt to select a special ability. Swordsmanship will make sword fights easier, wit and charm will make it easier to mingle with love interests, navigation will make it easier to sail the seas, gunnery will make ship-to-ship combat easier, and lastly, medicine will enable you to prolong your career as a pirate, which if you are chasing the best ending is almost essential. Lastly, there are 4 difficulties, with the Division of Plunder reward increasing as you scale these difficulties. More on that later. Before we continue, a massive thank you to everyone who supports the channel. If you enjoy this content, please do consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel. With that out of the way, let's grab our pirate hat, ready our sword, and head back to 1993 to remember Pirates Gold. Pirates was one of the first games that as a kid I actually had to make decisions amounting to more than what weapon to select or which platform to jump to, and this is because the overall gameplay loop is one of significant freedom. It's this same freedom that helps to deliver several different types of actual gameplay experiences, with everything from role-playing to combat and plenty in between. Now, the first time you start a new game, you're given a basic ship, a few men, and entry into a friendly town. Within a town, you have a few different places you can visit, with some of them not being available to you dependent on your behaviour towards the town's nationality. For example, the Spanish ports don't take kindly to pirates, whereas the Dutch are quite happy to do business with you regardless. There's a governor in each town, which is effectively your conduit to relationships with their nation. They'll provide an overview of who they are currently at war with, and depending on your gameplay choices, may offer you a letter of marque, effectively authorizing attacks on enemy ships and towns. Complete several successful attacks against these enemies, and you might just get granted a rank within that nation as well as some land, which will help contribute to your overall wealth calculation at the end of the game. And if you're really lucky, the governor might introduce you to his daughter, which you can form a relationship with, including marriage for several in-game benefits. Next up is the tavern, and this is a place where you can go to recruit new sailors to your party, as well as randomly meet mysterious travelers who might have some advice or part of a map that they are willing to part with for some gold. More on that later. There's also an opportunity to speak to both the barmaid and the barman, the latter of which will share the latest news, which is helpful in understanding the defensive and financial statuses of neighbouring towns. For example, if a town is attacked by Indians, their defence status is generally severely diminished, but their gold reserves relatively untouched, meaning they could be ripe for an attack by you. Next up is the trader, who basically buys and sells goods that you either legitimately or illegitimately acquire, again with a view to build your overall wealth up. And you guessed it, if you're lucky, he will introduce you to his daughter, which if you marry will give you some trading benefits like lower costs for goods. There's also a shipwright, which can repair your ships or enable you to sell ships or cannons. And lastly, there's a bank which lets you divide the plunder and either retire or continue on your next voyage after a short break, so long as you are still in good health. As I mentioned earlier, on the higher difficulty levels, you effectively get more shares of the total division. So there certainly is an incentive to play the game on the high difficulty levels. There's also the opportunity to increase the difficulty once you've completed a successful division of plunder, which is a really nice touch. Regardless, once you're done in town, you set sail and can pretty much travel wherever you like. However, wherever you are travelling, you are likely to encounter both friendly and unfriendly ships, the latter of which can also include other pirates, which are often well armed. And here's an interesting point. While Pirates Gold doesn't have any disc-based copy protection, it does have game-based copy protection, with each game session spawning a pirate as soon as you hit the water, with the game asking you to identify the pirate by their flag. Consulting the manual allows you to successfully identify the pirate and continue, whereas getting it wrong dramatically ramps up the game's difficulty, often resulting in your immediate destruction. It's kind of a similar situation to Star Trek 25th Anniversary, which I've covered in the past, and really is a reflection of this era of copy protection. Back to the combat, and this is split into two parts: ship-to-ship combat and sword-fighting combat if the two ships collide. Your total crew and armament plays a bit of a part in success in these sections. However, with the swordsman's skill, you can make the sword fights and overall combat much easier. I've defeated enemy ships with hundreds of people compared to my 20-odd just because I was good at sword fighting and won a duel against their captains. There's also land-based combat, which operates a bit like a real-time strategy game, requiring you to advance your forces to the enemy fort in an effort to duel against the fort commander. Now, when you're not in combat or trying to woo love interests in the ports, you'll be searching for treasure. The more treasure, the more gold, the more gold, the more plunder to split. While you can plunder ships and towns, the big payoffs come from finding certain specific stockpiles of treasure, such as the treasure fleet and silver train, as well as hidden Inca treasures, the locations of which can be obtained from speaking to people in ports, to obtain sections of maps, or by speaking to captured pirates. Honestly, for 1993, or more appropriately 1987, there is an incredible amount of systems and content in the game, and for the most part, it works really well. Normally in these retrospectives, it's easy to find things in a game that don't work well because I have a frame of reference for other games which did something better. However, due to the nature of the sheer variety in Pirates Gold, it's quite difficult to be objectively critical while showing appropriate respect for the variety on offer. Probably the biggest complaint I have around the game is the overall pacing and development. It's great that you were given a blank canvas at the start of the game to make your mark, but I've had scenarios where I have literally had my ship sunk within 5 minutes of starting the game, directly next to the friendly port, just because I ran into a very well-armed enemy ship. The game allows you to explore and experiment from the start, but I would have liked some form of virtual guardrails to ensure frustrating circumstances like this didn't occur right from the get-go. There's some other minor frustrations like being soft-locked between 2 points on the map at times, but overall the game is a lot more fun than it is frustrating. Presentation-wise, the gold version is effectively a remake of the original Pirates game, although with substantially improved graphics and sound. I can see a little bit of the Dead Space remake here. It basically stays true to the original game, but dramatically improves the overall presentation, which is really nice. The gold version effectively presents an entirely new graphical style, from the still images used in things like towns and interactions, to the ship-to-ship battlefield and beyond. It's all reimagined in much higher fidelity, allowing for a great representation of the overall pirate theme in the game. Perhaps my only complaint was that there isn't much in the way of variety of locations. While they all have different names, all of the towns and characters all look largely the same. I wonder if at least some variety might have helped to improve the production value. Alas, as I mentioned, it is a very substantial uplift from the original title. Regardless if you only have a PC speaker or something more capable, you are treated to appropriately piratey sound design, with some historic songs like What Do You Do with the Drunken Sailor mixed in with some new original content. There's no voice acting here outside of some grunts during combat, but to be fair to the game, for something with such an ambitious level of choice, it would have been very difficult at the time to make the voice acting work in a way that didn't get repetitive easily. Overall, the presentation in Pirates Gold is remarkably good, but in saying that, as mentioned earlier, the presentation of the 1987 original was groundbreaking for the time, so it's not so much of a surprise that the remake continues this tradition. Pirates Gold is a game that I loved as a kid and I also love as an adult, but I'm self-aware enough to know that a big part of why I still love this game is nostalgia more than anything else. Some games have become timeless in their gameplay experiences. Doom is a really good example of this. It made such an impact upon initial release that modern-day games some 30 years later are still borrowing concepts from it. And all things being equal, for the vast majority, Doom still stands up well today as a game that's fun to play. The difference is that Pirates Gold was a great game when it was released, but the underlying gameplay mechanics have not aged well. And while I still find it fun, I'm not so sure a newcomer to the game would. If anything, for a newcomer, the 2004 reboot is probably the better place to start. With a far more approachable gameplay loop combined with an updated aesthetic, it's certainly a lot easier to pick up and play. For me, Pirates Gold will always be the best entry in the series, but as I said before, a big part of that is likely to be the overall nostalgia. But that's enough from me. Do you agree or disagree with my opinions? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.